Welcome to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos. Enjoy watching. It was a quiet evening, and I had just settled into the living room expecting the usual routine to end the day. My wife came to me with an expression I couldn't decipher. She motioned for me to sit on the couch, and I obeyed, curious as to what was on her mind. Without much preamble, she declared that she wanted to have a serious conversation. This was not the kind of thing I expected. We had always kept things simple and focused on the essentials, but she seemed resolute, so I listened to her. She started by saying that our life had become too predictable, too routine. These words were direct, almost recited. She didn't mince words about how the monotony was weighing on her. I admit I didn't immediately agree. I had never considered routine to be a bad thing to me. It meant stability and control, but it didn't really ask my opinion on it. She was already moving on to what she thought we should do. A goal, something big to work toward. She explained that she had been thinking about it for a while and had come to the conclusion that we should aim to buy a new house, a bigger one, somewhere with more space, something more inspiring than our current apartment. I leaned back and asked her how she planned for us to finance this. Even if we sold our apartment, we wouldn't be able to cover the cost of a new house. It was a practical question, and I expected an equally practical answer. She didn't seem phased. She told me she had already started planning and had several ideas in mind. First, she mentioned a savings jar, which she called her dream fund. She claimed it already had a decent amount in it. Although I hadn't realized she was saving money like that, I was surprised, but I didn't interrupt it. Then she brought up something that caught me off guard. She told me she had talked to her best friend, and together they had come up with a potential solution. My wife mentioned that her friend's husband worked at a company that was looking to fill engineering positions, the kind of job I was qualified for. She added that there was even a remote position that she herself could take on to contribute financially. She presented it as the perfect opportunity to get us jobs, a steady income, and a path to buying the house she wanted. And I wanted to know how she could possibly think that everything would fall into place so easily. After all, we had been married for years, and she had never expressed a desire to move before. She had always seemed happy with the apartment, especially after I had spent countless hours renovating it to her tastes, from painting the walls to installing shelves exactly as she had imagined. I had put all my effort into making our home perfect. What had changed? Her response was almost offhand. She explained that she had recently taken an online motivational course and that it had pushed her to think bigger. She wanted a future that was bigger than just a dream, a house, a garden, a barbecue, the whole picture. I couldn't fault her determination, but I wasn't entirely convinced. It's not in my nature to throw myself into something so important without weighing up the risks and logistics. I pointed out that a motivational course and a little encouragement from a friend was no guarantee of success. I'm an engineer, I work with facts and results, not possibilities. But she replied confidently, saying that this could be the change we needed to escape our routine. Finally, she suggested that we go to a cafe the next day to meet her friend and her friend's husband. She wanted to discuss job prospects and get a clearer picture of how it could all work. She was convinced that it was worth it, and that I should come. I hesitated for a moment, not because I didn't care about her idea, but because I'm not the type to rush into things. Yet I could see that she wouldn't give up until I said yes. Finally, I nodded. Okay, I said, tomorrow we'll go see your friends and listen to what they have to offer. We'll see what they have to say. It was the logical next step, and I was ready to listen. For now, it was enough. The next day, as promised, we left for the cafe. Faithful to her habits, my wife took her time getting ready. It wasn't surprising. She liked to look her best, and I respected that, even if I ended up pacing in front of the door after what seemed like an eternity. We finally got in the car. The traffic wasn't too heavy, and the cafe wasn't very far, but I already had the impression that the day was starting slowly. I, however, refrained from any comment. When we arrived, we found a lively cafe, but not crowded. We chose a table by the window, ordered a coffee, and sat down while waiting for his friends. They soon arrived, a couple who seemed quite friendly. The husband, the man in question, got straight to the point. He explained that he knew the hiring manager at his company, and that he had already discussed the idea of my wife with him and his girlfriend. According to them, it was a solid plan, and he'd even done some research to get details about the position. He described the position he had in mind for me. It was to maintain and repair specialized transmitters located in hard-to-reach areas. It was field work with regular travel to different sites for inspection and maintenance. Clearly, it was not a classic office job. He mentioned that lore would be 3 days on followed by 3 days off, with sometimes week-long missions, which is double for someone like me who like structure. This rotation did not appeal to me straight away, but the salary advertised was significantly higher than that of my current job. I asked some specific questions about the nature of the work, the type of equipment, the level of responsibility, the logistics of travel. He answered confidently, emphasizing the support and training provided. It seemed IG but manageable. I acknowledged that it might be worth it while specifying that I would need time to leave my current position. He agreed, telling me that there was no immediate urgency, but that it was better to decide fairly quickly as the company was in a hurry to fill the position. The discussion then drifted to the possible role of my wife. They explained that it was a remote job, mainly data management in Google Sheets and file processing. It was enough, but less remunerative. My wife, however, did not seem discouraged. She said she was willing to accept since she had never really worked for them before. It was a first step in making a financial contribution. I appreciated his willingness, even if this work seemed to mainly serve our overall plan rather than addressing personal aspirations. Towards the end of the conversation, the friend's husband mentioned an upcoming company event. He suggested it would be a good opportunity for us to meet the team and get a feel for the work environment. He warned us that the team had its fair share of eccentric personalities, students, programmers, and other young professionals with particular Interests they're nice, he said, but don't be surprised if they're a bit unusual. I didn't comment, but made a mental note to stay alert. The event seemed relaxed, but essential. He clearly wanted us to socialize with the team before committing. My wife was enthusiastic, seeing it as an adventure. I wasn't particularly thrilled about the idea of mingling with strangers, but I knew it was part of the process. Meeting the team would allow me to judge the work environment for myself, so I agreed. By the time we finished our coffee, we had covered all the necessary points. We took the information about the event, thanked our contacts, and concluded the meeting. My wife was at the year leaving visibly optimistic about this opportunity. One was more reserved, but I decided to keep an open mind. We got back on the road, discussing the organization for the corporate event and what awaited us. Once we got back, we sat down again to talk about it. My wife was overflowing with enthusiasm, evoking all the promises that it could represent. On my side, I was less excited, even if the salary for this job was clearly interesting. The idea of a cycle of 3 days of work and 3 days of leave displeased me a little. It broke the routine that I appreciated, but what had really struck me was the remark on the strange interests of the team. I told her that it intrigued me without being necessarily reassuring. My wife, however, remained optimistic. For her, it would be fun to meet them, with a bit of luck to make friends. Her enthusiasm was contagious, but still had reservations about over the next 2 weeks. I focused on completing my obligations in my current job. I wasn't particularly attached to it, but resigning was still a big step. By the end of that period, I had handed in my resignation and was officially ready to start this new position. It was a gamble, but I was willing to do it for the financial gain. My wife was delighted to see that we had taken this step. She even started learning her future remote job, learning spreadsheets and form processing. She was determined, and I respected that. The day of the corporate event arrived quickly. My wife and I arrived on site, and the atmosphere was very lively. Clearly, they had put the means to welcome everyone in a good mood. As soon as we entered, we were greeted warmly by several employees. We were offered drinks, we were introduced to people, and the evening started off rather well. That said, it didn't take long for a strange incident to occur. A young man who was clearly in love with us staggered away towards us and made a rudely inappropriate remark about our sex life. I was taken aback, but kept my cool before I could say or do anything. Another employee pulled him back and apologized profusely. The man who had just apologized, and who seemed sensible, explained to us that the guy had drunk too much. I told him it was okay, even though I had almost reacted more abruptly. We laughed and then moved on to introductions. The man who had intervened had the same job as the one I was going to do. He explained to me that we would be alternating 3-day shifts covering the same work slots. This allowed me to get his perspective, and I felt a little more comfortable. Meanwhile, my wife was chatting with other people. She was in her element, striking up conversations without and quickly making friends. I couldn't help but notice a group of young men at another table who seemed to be staring at us. Their gazes, a little too insistent, made me feel uncomfortable. I leaned towards my new interlocutor to find out who these guys were. He smiled and explained that they were fresh out of university, employed in another department. They are harmless, just a little immature and too inclined to want to be noticed. He added. His relaxed demeanor reassured me, even though I kept an eye on them. As the evening progressed, other people joined our table, and the discussions became more animated. My wife seemed to get on well with everyone, and I myself began to relax. The event was much less formal than I had feared, which helped me to release the pressure. The young men from earlier did not come back to bother us, apart from their loud laughter and a few awkward attempts at socializing. Overall, the evening was looking positive. At one point, 2 other colleagues joined us, and India gave me some useful advice on how to handle my future field work. I appreciated the practical information on her part. My wife was more social than professional, but she seemed to be enjoying herself. She has always been more outgoing than me, and that was true again that night. I didn't mind. I was glad to have her so comfortable. Towards the end of the evening, we went around the table to say our goodbyes. Most people seemed genuinely friendly, and some were even looking forward to having me join their team. I had gone to this event with little expectation, but it ended on a surprisingly positive note. We thanked everyone for their warm welcome and made our way home. During the drive, my wife was already talking about all the people she had met and how this new chapter might unfold. I sat in silence, reflecting on the evening and preparing myself for what to expect. When I got home after the event, I sat down with my wife to take stock. I told her how relieved I was that she works from home. Some Galaba seemed fishy to me, I noticed, thinking about the stories I had heard and what I had seen. She laughed, reminding me that we had all been young and carefree once they had just graduated from college. She said they would eventually mature. I was fully reassured, but I let it go for now. She then mentioned that she would have to go to the office soon to get her work computer. You will be on a mission. That's good. When you come back, you can tell me how your first full shift. When she added 3 days later, at the end of my shift, I came home to find her asleep at the table, her new laptop still open in front of her. She looked peaceful, like someone who had just completed an important task. I gently woke her up to ask how her day had been. Great, she replied, smiling. I got to see some of the guys from the event again. Her tone, casual, intrigued me. I asked her who exactly she had seen. She explained that she and her friend had gone for coffee, and that they had come across a group of people present at the company party. He had recognized her and had invited himself to their table. Among them was the same guy who had made the inappropriate remark about sex at the party. Hearing this, I felt irritated. And what did he say this time? I asked, trying to stay calm. She laughed, saying that it was nothing. He hardly spoke. He must have been embarrassed by what happened last time. She said, relax, Rambo. Her lightness did not reassure me. I reminded her that if the other employee had not intervened, I might have hit him that evening. She rolled her eyes, brushing off my comment with a wave of her hand that she probably judged too protective. Anyway, she continued, we ended up talking a good time, and they even came by then. One of
then walked me home and dropped off the laptop.
Surprised I froze. They came to the house. I asked. She nodded as if it was no problem. We ate pizza. We talked a little. Then they left. Nothing special. I couldn't hide my displeasure. Why didn't you tell me anything? I asked. Her answer was almost too detached. I didn't think it was important. She said I was with my friend the whole time. Why worry? His carelessness bothered me, but I preferred not to make things worse. It's just weird. I replied. The guests without
telling me say, but oh well, it's done. She saw
that I wasn't comfortable. If it upsets you that much, she suggested, we can invite them again so you can get to know them better. Well, see, they're not that bad. I wasn't thrilled with the idea, but people understood the logic. Okay, I said, but if he hangs around here, I'll see for myself if he's worth it. She smiled. You're already so suspicious. She said, we'll see if you change your mind after seeing them again. I didn't answer right away, thinking back to the impression he had given me at the company party. Finally, I blurted out, maybe I'm suspicious, but we'll see. A week later, so my wife invited the group to come to our place as planned. They arrived on time, and at first everything seemed to be going well. The guys were polite, even going so far as to apologize for any inappropriate behavior during the company event. I appreciated the gesture, even though I was on my guard. I'm not the type to relax quickly, especially with strangers. As the evening went on, I started to feel something disturbing. One of the guys didn't take their eyes off my wife at first. It was discreet, but as time went by, his insistent glances became more obvious. I watched him without wanting to cause a scandal, but it was clear his attention was not insignificant. My wife, whether she was insensitive or ignoring him, continued to chat as if nothing was happening. I remained silent, but my annoyance grew. Later in the evening, another guy practically stuck to her to talk, staying very close, laughing at all his remarks without ever really moving away. I finally had enough and decided to intervene. I approached and asked him point blank what he was doing. He looked surprised, but replied that he found my wife very interesting and that they had friends in common. I nodded without moving back. My mere presence made him nervous, and he quickly found an excuse to move away. The rest of the evening passed without major incident, but this unhealthy feeling didn't leave me. When the guests left, I shared my feelings with my wife. They may
pretend to be nice, but one of them was
staring at you and another wouldn't let go. She brushed off my remark, saying I was exaggerating. You're making things up. They were just friendly. I wasn't convinced. Nice or not, I'm telling you something is wrong. I don't want you to spend time with them anymore, I said curtly. My wife didn't like my firmness and accused me of being unreasonable and too possessive, but I maintained my position. I'm serious. If he continues to behave like this, I don't want to see them anymore. Despite my hostility, life went on. Soon I noticed a new behavior in my wife. When I was away for work, she sometimes missed my calls or took a long time to respond to my messages. This happened often enough that I became suspicious. One evening when I got back, I asked her directly what was it. She shrugged, pretending it was just a coincidence. You get too many ideas, she said. Sometimes I'm just busy. Then I got a new assignment that required 5 days of traveling to different sites. Before leaving, I made sure everything was in order at home. During this tour, the same pattern repeated itself. She missed my calls and was late in responding to my messages. When I finally managed to get her on the phone, I asked her again why she wasn't answering. This time she came up with a completely different explanation. Someone brought me a shot, she said casually. I'll take care of it and take it for a walk. Her answer caught me off guard. I didn't know what to make of it, and her strangely calm tone left me perplexed, as if it was an excuse to avoid my questions. Annoyed but not wanting to argue, I ended the call. Fine, we'll talk about it later, but I remained convinced that she was hiding something from me. My unease was growing, and I couldn't be satisfied with her explanations. Our neighborhood had accessible street cameras, so I decided to migrate straight away. Leaning over to check out her famous dog walking routine, by viewing the footage I discovered the unthinkable. I saw her not walking a puppy, but throwing a mind-boggling number of used condoms into a trash can. My stomach knotted up in front of these images, and I had a hard time accepting the obvious. The quantity alone was enough to confirm my worst suspicions. Under the influence of adrenaline and anger, I made a hasty decision. I was going to confront her head on right away. I worked non-stop to finish my mission a day early. Impossible to fall asleep. I was consumed by rage and stupor. As soon as I got in the car and drove at full speed towards the house, determined to have answers. When I arrived, I noticed that there were no cars in front of our house, which made me hesitate for a moment. If there were several of them, they surely wouldn't have arrived on foot. Despite everything, I wasn't going to back out. I parked the car a few streets away. I walked discreetly to my house, then I entered the garage, mig-rec, hiding to observe. The hours passed, the evening settled in, and my patience was put to the test. Finally, I heard the characteristic sound of a car parking. I waited another half hour so as not to interrupt them too early. Then in the silence of the night, I heard noises coming from the house, unmistakable, intimate sounds that left no room for doubt. My heart beating fast, my teeth clenched. I kept my calm for what I was going to do. I went back to my car. I took my gun from the gun box, and I entered the house, my mind focused on the confrontation. Inside, I saw the scene I dreaded. My wife completely naked, surrounded by several men, also half-dressed. It was obscene and undeniable chaos. For a moment everyone froze when they saw me with a gun in their hands. Without hesitation, I took out my phone and started taking pictures. The men panicked, screaming while trying to gather their things to escape. I shot a bullet into the ground to stop them dead. No one moved. I shouted in a cold voice controlling me. The threat of the gun held them back. Even though they were all shaking, one of them stumbled and fell flat on his face. I immediately pointed my gun at him. He looked at me with wide eyes in terror. That's when I recognized him. He also worked in the company. The guy with the shift. You, I said in a dull voice. Speak, what's going on here? And since when has he been stammering, searching for words? I had no time to lose. Speak now, where you won't get out, not alive from this house under pressure. He confessed everything. He came regularly during my trips, and my wife had made them believe that she was divorced, taking advantage of my absences to maintain the illusion. Each word he said had the effect of a knife wound on me, but I remained silent until the end of his story. When he finished, I looked at my wife. She was frozen, her face twisted with fear and guilt. I turned again to the guy and pointed at the door with the barrel of my gun. Get out, I ordered. He got up and ran away, even abandoning his shoes. Then I faced my wife. A heavy silence settled. That I ended up breaking up. So you told them that we were divorced? Perfect. Consider that it's really okay. Now I didn't wait for his answer. Prepare yourself for the life you deserve. And I added, before leaving the house I got back in my car and drove to my best friend's house. He was someone in whom I had absolute trust, and I knew that I would need his advice for the future. No matter what happened, I was done with his lies and his betrayal. When I arrived at my best friend's house, he greeted me with a calm professionalism that I knew him for. In addition to being my friend, he was a formidably competent lawyer. After listening to me attentively, he leaned back looking thoughtful. You have everything you need to win your case, he said. The photos, the testimony, everything is in your favor. Now let's talk about how to leave her with nothing. His friend talking did me good. I wasn't in the mood for euphemisms. He leaned forward, speaking in a low voice. Do you remember that savings jar you told me about, the one your wife had been filling for years? I agreed. It was something she was proud of, even if she rarely talked about it. If this money is not declared anywhere, no bank statement, no official record you can take, it sees, no one will be able to prove that this money existed. He explained to me that it would be a means of pressure, and that above all it would prevent him from enriching himself from the situation. I remained silent for a moment, letting the idea take hold. It was not a decision to be taken lightly, but I could not pay the logic while I take care of the legal part. He added, you must go back to live there and act as if nothing had happened. It will give us time to prepare everything, and if she hurries to find a lawyer, it could even work in our favor against all odds. I accepted the idea of pretending that everything was fine. Disgusted me, but I trusted her judgment. That evening I came home trying to play it off. As soon as I walked through the door, she rushed towards me in tears. She fell to her knees, clinging to my hands and begging me to forgive her. Her despair was palpable, but it only strengthened my determination. We will see, simply answered. There are many of things to consider. She seemed relieved, as if my measured response gave her hope. She stood up and tried to compose a calm face. I had a hard time looking at her, but I knew I had to stay focused. At dinner she did everything from Mamadou talking about her desire to fix things and rebuild our relationship. I nodded without elaborating, letting her pour out her promises. Later in the I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. She fell asleep quickly, no doubt exhausted by the weight of her guilt on my side. I couldn't find rest. These lies were going round and round in my head, just like my friend's words. I had to plan carefully what would happen next. The next day, I watched her carefully in her movements. She did everything to play the perfect wife. She made me breakfast, asked me my plans for the day. I played along, answering vaguely, pretending to like her, when in reality I was already looking for the hiding place of her jar. In the evening, I started to hatch my plan. I was going to wait for a time when she was away, for example, when she was shopping, to search the house from top to bottom. In the meantime, I had to play this role of Mary in full reconciliation. I hated every second of this charade, but I told myself that each unpleasant moment brought me closer to the conclusion. In the evening, when she was already asleep, I finalized my thoughts. The sooner I would act, faster I could close this chapter of my life. The next day, when my wife went out to do the shopping, I knew that it was my chance. The house was quiet, and I had time to conduct a complete search. I started in the bedroom. I looked in the drawers under the bed without finding anything particularly suspicious. Then I continued in the living room and the cupboards, methodically, room by room. It was only when I arrived at the storage room that I discovered what I was looking for: several large jars, each filled to the brim with lias of $100 bills, carefully arranged. The vision took me both shocked and relieved. I unscrewed the lid of one of the jars to check. The notes were impeccable. There were at least 5 jars, all equally full. I remembered those times when her parents sometimes gave her money, encouraging her to save. She had always been discreet about the exact amount, and I had never really tried to find out. The total was way beyond what I had imagined. I quickly got to work. I replaced each jar in a cardboard box, wrapped in old cloth to hide them, and I carried them to the car, being careful not to attract attention. Once the trunk was closed, I sent a message to my wife. My father called me. He needs me to bring him a drill. I'll come back later. It was a plausible excuse from the one she would end. Question: the road to my parents' house seemed endless, even though I wasn't really in a hurry. Once I arrived, I explained the situation to them in detail: his infidelity, the money, and the Bacos. The plan worked out with my lawyer friend. They were shocked, but they supported me. We'll take care of it, firmly. My father: no one will come looking for him here. My mother nodded her head with a look of determination. I could count on them to hide the money. It reassured me to know that I was putting this money out of her reach. When I left, I mentally rehearsed what I would say to my wife if she ever asked me. She almost never did, but I wanted to be ready. When I got home, she had already come back from shopping and was putting the food away. Everything went well, she asked me in a casual tone. Yes, I answered simply. My father is calm. Now she seemed satisfied with my answer and continued to tidy up. The days that followed were among the most difficult of my life, living with her and acting as if nothing had happened, making me feel like I was betraying myself. Every smile she gave me, every attempt to seduce me, only fueled my resentment. But I remembered of the final goal. The papers were being prepared, and I just had to hold on. At night, I lay awake thinking over the Smallest details, I imagined the money now safe and the way I was going to orchestrate the rest. Every minute spent by his side seemed endless, but I held on because I knew that soon it would all be over. A few days before our wedding anniversary, my phone rang. It was my best friend, the lawyer. "The documents are ready," he said calmly. "You can give them to him whenever you want." I thanked him. He hung up. My mind already busy finding the best way to get the news to him. The timing couldn't have been better. Our anniversary was approaching, and I decided to turn this date into my final foot in the sand. It wasn't just breaking up our marriage, it was taking back control. I spent the day refining my staging. I found a gigantic box, and I placed the divorce papers at the very bottom. On top, I stacked other smaller boxes, each carefully closed and nested in the previous one. In the end, it formed a kind of Russian doll, but in a nightmarish version intended to make her wait before discovering the outcome. On
the day I remained calm, she greeted me with a smile, hoping to take
advantage of the birthday to repair our fractured couple. I put on a brave face as if I shared her enthusiasm. "I have a surprise for you," I said in a light tone. Seeing her eyes shine with hope, I asked her to wait in the living room while I went to get the package outside. It was heavy, but the adrenaline helped me carry it. I put it in front of her. "What is it?" she asked. I was amused. I was intrigued by seeing this colossal box. "Your gift," I replied. "Go ahead, open it." She hesitated, then she started to tear the packaging. Each box contained a smaller one, and she had to open them at one. Her amusement quickly gave way to annoyance. "What is this delirium?" she finally said. "Go on," I simply replied. It took her a good half hour to get to the last box. The initial excitement had given way to obvious exasperation when she finally discovered the contents, the divorce papers. Her face froze. She turned livid, looking at the documents in disbelief, her hands shaking. "What is this?" she whispered in a barely audible voice. "You announced to everyone that we were divorced," and I retorted coldly. "Now it's official. Consider this my confirmation." She immediately exploded, throwing the papers to the ground and swearing at me. "It's a joke. You're out of your mind," she screamed, her voice getting higher and higher. When she understood that I wasn't joking, she threw herself at me. Her fists tightened. I grabbed her wrists and pushed them away gently but firmly. "Don't even say," I said in an icy tone. She collapsed in tears, begging me, of all the names, blaming me for destroying what we had built. "J. Rain Aim, what we had, you destroyed it the day you brought those guys back here," I replied. "This is the life you chose. Now you own it." Without adding another word, I went to the bedroom. I started to gather her things. I threw them one by one in the hallway without caring about the state she ended up in. She followed me, screaming, crying, but I didn't stop. When I was done, all her things were piled up in front of the front door. I opened it and motioned for her to exit. "Your new house is outside," I said in a cold voice. "Where you threw our relationship. Consider it poetic justice." She stood there for a few seconds, stunned, before walking through the door. I closed it behind her without another word, putting a definitive end to our story. The first thing I did after throwing her out was change all the locks. I didn't want to take any chances. She was unpredictable, and I didn't see her giving up so easily. The locksmith came the next morning, and within 1 hour I was at peace. I felt a certain relief at the idea that she no longer had access to what had been our home. Of course, she was quick to come back. I heard the handle being shaken several times over the next few days. Sometimes she would bang on the door screaming my name. I ignored her each time, standing right behind it without a sound until she left, but she wouldn't give up so easily. A week later she showed up with the police, claiming that I had stolen her money and that I had illegally kicked her out of the house, a scene worthy of a bad soap opera. When the officers knocked, I opened the door calmly, displaying the assurance of someone who had nothing to reproach himself for. Behind them, my now ex-wife was fuming, accusing me of theft and demanding that he let her in. He at all costs searched the house. "He hides my money," she yelled. One of the police officers looked at me, visibly skeptical, but had to do his job. "So do you mind if we take a look?" he asked. I nodded without hesitation. "Go ahead, I have nothing to hide, but first let me explain." I told them the story, her infidelity, her assault when I confronted her, and I showed them the pictures that proved my words. "I threw her out because she tried to hit me after I discovered her with other men," and I said, handing them my phone so they could look at the pictures. The officers consulted them, their faces closed as they grasped the situation. "I did nothing illegal. She was the one who lied from the start." They still took a look in the house as she insisted that we find her famous jar of stolen money. I accompanied them to the storage room, opening the closet with a theatrical gesture. Inside, only old shoe boxes containing old boots and some sneakers. A policeman took a box and opened it. Nothing incriminating. My ex exploded with rage. "They were there," she shouted. "He must have moved them." The officers looked at each other, visibly unconvinced. "Listen," said one of them in a tone that was both firm and polite, "without concrete proof, we can't do anything. We can't accuse him without proof." She then talked about her parents who had given her money, claiming that there were witnesses, but the police pointed out to her that there was no official trace or evidence linking this money to me. "Even if what you say is true," added one of them, "it doesn't change the fact that he kicked you out of his home, and judging by what we saw, you are in no position to demand anything here." Furious, she began to insult them, accusing them of taking my side. The agents remained professional, but you could see he was losing patience. "Listen to one of them to cut it short. We have seen evidence, and you seem to be at fault. It is time for you to leave." She wanted to protest, but she understood that it was useless. Giving me one last look, she left the house. The police officers nodded to me. "We will make a report, sir," said one of them. "If she comes back, call us." I thanked them and watched them walk away, leaving her alone on the sidewalk. She stood there for a moment pretending, then she left, mumbling. Calm returned, and I locked the door with a deep sense of closure. This confrontation had exhausted me. But it was a new step taken to keep her at a distance thanks to the evidence, and with my lawyer friend at the helm the divorce went as planned. It was not her first case of infidelity and financial dispute, so he conducted the procedure efficiently. The evidence against her was irrefutable photos of rape on his part. Moreover, as he had announced, he gave me a special rate for his fees as a token of friendship. To thank him, I discreetly used some of the money I had recovered, which seemed to me a fair return for things. Once the legal formalities were completed, I did not delay in selling the house. It represented everything that had gone wrong, and I wanted to get rid of it. The market was favorable, and she left quickly. With the money, I was able to buy another house in a completely different neighborhood, far from all the memories and the entourage of my old life. The new house suited me perfectly, calm, spacious, a real renewal. I needed a place to rebuild my life without the shadow of my past. As for my career, I also changed direction. The position that I had accepted at the insistence of my ex no longer appealed to me. The long days and the constraints were no longer worth it, especially since I now had financial security. So I have returned to my old job, less well paid, but more peaceful. This return to familiar territory has me did good. On the advice of some friends, I decided to invest the remaining amount. I hired a competent financial analyst who helped me invest the money intelligently. We set up a diversified portfolio favoring stable stocks, offering regular growth and good dividends. It was not a plan to get rich quickly, but that was not my goal. I wanted stability and the assurance of living comfortably without stress. Quickly, I began to enjoy the fruits of these investments. I then managed one by one the connections that my ex-wife could have exploited. I spoke to my parents, explaining everything to them, so that they would be ready in case she contacted them. They promised not to answer her and to support me. I also contacted our mutual friends, sharing enough information for them to understand why I no longer wanted contact with her. Everyone understood and agreed to close the door on her. Obviously, she did not stop there. She tried to contact my parents, then our mutual friends, asking them to intercede on her behalf, but they refused to. Getting tangled up. Dejected, she fell back on me, making endless calls and voice messages, mixing accusations, supplications, and demands. She wanted us to see each other, to fix things, as if we could suddenly erase what had happened. I never answered. For me, there was nothing left to say. She had destroyed everything that existed between us. She tried everything, even showing up unexpectedly at my parents' house, hoping that they would let her in. My father, a man of few words but of principle, clearly told her that she was not welcome. She left furious, but this attempt only confirmed that I had done the right thing by explaining everything to them. The calls became less frequent over time. Each time her number appeared, I felt a mixture of annoyance and pity. I had changed my life both emotionally and materially, and each of these attempts to reconnect showed above all how disconnected she was from reality. When she demanded explanations or tried to make me feel guilty, I hung up. When she left a message, I deleted it without listening to her. In the end, she couldn't do anything. All the bridges were cut. She had burned the ones that connected her to my universe, and I didn't intend to rebuild them. Each call was missed, each message ignored. Comforted me a little more in the idea that if I had turned the page for good, she could persist. I won't go back. I had rebuilt my life, and she had no place in it. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the new stories.